The Dominion learned humanity had become interstellar when a ship the size of a moon crossed their sacred border and broadcast one name in 4,000 languages. Margaret. Not surrender. Not conquest. Not warning. A name. Subcommander Yethries ran the scan 7 times before he stopped pretending the instruments were broken. The vessel moving through the outer Dominion perimeter was larger than border station Ascending Truth, larger than most colonial moons, and its engines bent space so violently that the station's computers kept classifying it as a young star. It ignored every border beacon. It ignored every automatic threat. It ignored the armed patrol frigates that raced out to intercept it like insects throwing themselves before a mountain. Then the visual feed sharpened, and Yethries forgot how to breathe. The ship's hull was covered in names. Not serial numbers. Not unit markings. Names. Thousands upon thousands of human names carved into black alloy so dense Dominion science insisted it could not be carved at all. Some names were ancient, worn smooth by radiation and dust. Others were fresh, bright, cut deep enough to look like wounds in metal. Beside them were dates, messages, promises, fragments of family history. James Chun, he never stopped believing. Sarah Chun, she taught her children the mission. David Chun, he built the engines that would take us there. Yethries knew the old file on humanity. Primitive, emotional, isolated, quarantined, not worth conquest. The file showed chemical rockets and fragile orbital cans. His screen showed a memorial dreadnought crossing Dominion space like grief had learned faster than light travel. Then the ship broadcast again. Margaret. Yethries sent the alert to High Command with trembling hands. 6 hours later, the Dominion Third Fleet moved to intercept. 42 warships, 3 battlecruiser squadrons, 6 assault carriers, and the dreadnought Eternal Dominion. Enough firepower to glass a rebellious continent before breakfast. The human vessel did not slow down. And that was the first moment the Dominion began to understand that humanity had not come to invade. Humanity had come to remember. Fleet Admiral Corvaith stood on the bridge of Eternal Dominion and watched the impossible vessel break every rule of power he had ever trusted. The ship's transponder identified it in human standard and then in Dominion tactical code as UHS Promise. Classification, Deep-Range Generational Search Vessel. Mission duration, 40 years active, 200 years inherited. Origin, Sole Quarantine Boundary. Crew, Chen Lineage Expeditionary Continuance Fleet. The last part sounded like mistranslation until Corvaith's intelligence officer ran the human cultural file and found the meaning buried under old xenopsychology notes. Family. The warship was a family. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. The Promise had been built, launched, crewed, maintained, and inherited by one bloodline and those who had married into it. For generations had lived inside its hull. Children had been born under reactor light. Elders had died in low-gravity gardens. Teachers had taught history beside engine vibration. Pilots had learned navigation by tracing the route of a girl who vanished 2 centuries before they were born. Every name carved into the hull belonged to someone who had lived for the mission, died during the mission, or given their life so the ship could continue. Corvaith found that grotesque, then fascinating, then inconvenient, because he had 42 warships around it. And the Promise was behaving as if he had brought decorations. Broadcast again, he ordered. His communications officer obeyed. Human vessel, you have violated sovereign Dominion space. Cut your engines and prepare to be boarded. This is your final warning. The Promise continued forward. Its course was not random. It was moving toward the Dominion core, toward old restricted systems, toward places even younger officers were not permitted to see on maps. It did not power weapons. It did not launch fighters. It did not answer threats. It broadcast only one word. Margaret. Corvaith felt his anger rise. No one ignored the Dominion. Not pirates. Not border clans. Not fallen empires. Not machine swarms. Not the gas breathers of Kellen Deep, who had once refused tax tribute and now existed only as a cautionary mineral layer. On their own homeworld. Certainly not humans. Warning shot, he said. Across their bow. Eternal Dominion fired its main cannon. A white beam of concentrated stellar heat cut across space, powerful enough to fracture a small moon. It was meant to pass before the human ship as a demonstration, but the Promise turned into it. The entire bridge went silent. The beam struck the forward shield dead center. Light swallowed the human vessel. Corvaith waited for the sensors to show vapor, debris, broken courage. The light faded. The Promise emerged with shields burning silver, hull names glowing hot around the impact zone, engines steady. No damage. No retreat. No answer except a new transmission. Where? Corvaith's mandibles tightened. Full tactical scan. Admiral, said the intelligence officer, voice suddenly different. I found something. Something useful? Something old. The file appeared on Corvaith's command display. Species Assessment Initiative. 203 years earlier, a Dominion science vessel had crossed the edge of human-controlled space, where humans had barely spread beyond their birth system. 12 specimens had been removed from a frontier colony near Saturn's outer mining arc. The report described the acquisition as low risk. Humanity lacked long-range detection. The local colony lacked defenses. The specimens were transported to Dominion research facilities for biological classification. 12 names. 7 adults. 3 adolescents. 2 children. One of them was Margaret Chun, female, age 7. Corvaith read the line again. Age 7. The Promise broadcast again. Margaret. Where? For the first time in his life, Corvaith felt the floor beneath certainty shift. This was not an invasion. It was not a border test. It was not reconnaissance. It was not even revenge, not yet. It was a family asking the galaxy where someone had put its child. His weapons officer waited. Admiral, shall we fire again? Corvaith looked at the human ship. The rational decision was simple. Destroy it. Study the wreckage. Bury the incident. Close the border. Prevent escalation before humanity understood enough to make demands. The irrational thought came. Softer. Let it pass. He hated that thought. The Dominion had not survived 8,000 years by allowing ghosts to walk through its heart. It survived because it crushed uncertainty before uncertainty learned to speak. All ships, Corvaith said. Full barrage. Disable or destroy. 42 warships opened fire. Space became white. Plasma lances, coilgun storms, antimatter torpedoes, gravitic shear charges, and fighter-bomber salvos slammed into the Promise from every direction. The Dominion Third Fleet used an annihilation pattern normally reserved for fortress moons. The sphere of fire around the human ship burned so bright that Ascending Truth, 6 light minutes away, had to dim its sensors. Inside the storm, the Promise finally launched something. Not missiles. Not boarding craft. Not counterfire. It launched 36 small vessels in a tight defensive bloom around the hull. Human interceptors, old but viciously elegant, cream-white frames scarred by decades of deep space dust, blue engines flaring, pale gold names painted along their wings. Their call signs appeared in Dominion tracking systems. Margaret Wing. Each fighter carried a Chun family name. They did not attack Dominion ships. They intercepted torpedoes. They cut through missile streams. They threw themselves between antimatter warheads and the ship's damaged shield. They flew like every pilot had been born knowing the shape of sacrifice, because most of them had. The barrage lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, 7 Margaret Wing fighters were gone. The Promise still moved. Its shield flickered now. Hull sections smoked. Dozens of carved names had been scorched black, but not erased. Then it broadcast again. Where? Corvaith stared at the screen, and something inside his command crew changed. It was not mercy. Not yet. It was confusion turning into fear. Because no Dominion doctrine contained a response for an enemy that could endure destruction, had the strength to retaliate, and still refused to fire because its purpose was larger than victory. The intelligence officer approached again. I tracked the specimen records. Corvaith turned slowly. Where? Vethkar Moon. Biological Processing. Facility 17. Margaret Chun survived acquisition, was transferred through labor divisions, and died there 169 years ago. The remains were processed into numbered burial residue. Plot 1447. A colder word sat beneath the clean report. Recycled. Corvaith looked at the Promise. It was still blind searching toward the core. He understood what would happen when they learned. He did not know whether humans screamed louder in grief or silence. Do not transmit that, he said. The intelligence officer blinked. Admiral, do not. Then what are our orders? Corvaith should have ordered another attack. Instead, he hesitated for one fatal second. Far below the capital city, In the Biological Acquisition Archives, archivist Sulin ended that hesitation. She had lived 40 years under the Dominion's oldest stone, surrounded by records no one wanted to remember. Millions of files filled the buried archive, specimens collected, measured, used, discarded. Sulin had never considered herself cruel. Cruelty required appetite. She had no appetite. She filed. She indexed. She preserved the Dominion's shame in clean categories because someone had to know where the bodies were, even if nobody cared to ask. Then a military officer arrived asking for Margaret Shin. Sulin opened the file. She had read thousands like it. This one did not behave like the others. Margaret Shun, age 7, acquired from Colony 7, outer human system. Physical condition healthy. Mental condition distressed. Subject repeatedly asks for mother. Subject refuses cooperation without comfort object. Comfort object confiscated. Subject sedation increased. Sulin read on. Margaret lived 27 years after acquisition. She was moved from facility to facility. Light industrial work. Agricultural processing. Low-gravity mining support. Factory maintenance. Medical trials when labor output declined. She asked about her home for years. She asked whether anyone was looking. She was told no. At age 34, body failure from accumulated labor stress. Disposition, Vethkar Processing Facility 17. Remains, Plot 1447. No biological value recovered. File closed. Sulin sat in the dark. Archive with her hands shaking. She pulled up the human ship's scan. The Promise had been traveling 40 years. The first crew had died. Their children had continued. Then their grandchildren. Generations of humans had crossed the dark for a dead child who had asked for her mother, while the Dominion taught her no one would come. But someone had been coming. They had simply been too far away. Sulin found the Promise's broadcast frequency. Technically, her access was read-only. Technically, treason required intent. She intended. Margaret Shun. Vethkar. Plot 1447. She sent it. The Promise changed course 6 seconds later. Direct vector. Maximum drive. No more searching. Sulin leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. Security would find her. The trace would be obvious. She would be removed, questioned, probably executed. She had filed records for 40 years and done nothing. Now she had done one thing. It would have to be enough. The Promise burned toward Vethkar like a wound crossing space. Captain Yara Chun stood at the center of its bridge, one hand gripping the command rail hard enough to make her knuckles pale. She had never seen Earth. Neither had her mother. Neither had her grandmother. The only sunrise she knew came from archive projections played in the ship's classrooms, where children learned about blue skies, oceans, weather, trees, and the face of a 7-year-old girl named Margaret who had vanished before any of them existed. Yara knew Margaret's laugh from a damaged home recording. She knew Margaret's favorite song. She knew Margaret had been missing her front tooth in the last image taken before the abduction. She knew the promise made by Margaret's brother, Elias Chun, who had survived the raid because he hid inside an air recycler while Dominion machines took his sister. Elias had spent the rest of his life telling humanity one sentence. They took Margaret. We are going to get her back. He died before humans had true interstellar drive. His daughter helped design the first engine. Her son joined the launch crew. His granddaughter was Yara. The ship shuddered. Report, Yara said. Lieutenant Commander James Chun, her cousin and first officer, answered from tactical. Shields at 4%. Outer armor compromised across decks 7 through 9. Margaret winged down to 21 fighters. Drive core temperature above survival recommendation. Casualties, a pause too long. 47 dead. 112 wounded. Yara closed her eyes for half a second. 47 names to carve. Time to Vethkar? 20 minutes. After 2 centuries of searching, 20 minutes felt like cruelty. Push the engines harder. James turned. Captain, the drive core is already past redline. Harder. The promise groaned. Deep inside the moon-sized ship, engines built by generations screamed against physics. Children in the protected central habitats held hands under emergency lighting. Elders strapped themselves into med bays and whispered Margaret's name like prayer. Engineers bled in overheating corridors and kept working. In the Hall of Names, where every dead crew member was carved into interior stone before being cut onto the outer hull, a teacher gathered the youngest children and told them the mission was almost complete. Dominion interceptors attacked again near the Vethkar approach. Not Corvaith's main fleet. He had fallen behind, still undecided, still ashamed of that undecision. These were core defense squadrons acting under automated border law. Fast attack craft in clusters of 12. Cold pilots. Simple orders. Stop the human vessel. Margaret Wing met them above Vethkar's dying star. 21 human fighters against 160 Dominion interceptors. They did not try to win. They bought minutes. Squadron leader Anna Chun, great-great-granddaughter of one of the Promise launch engineers, led the wing through a defensive spiral so tight Dominion targeting systems classified it as debris turbulence. She shouted over open comms so the bridge could hear her. "Captain, we'll keep the door open." Yara wanted to order them back. She did not insult them by trying. The fighters burned across space in pale blue arcs, intercepting missiles, slicing through attack formations, dragging enemy craft away from the Promise's wounded shield. One by one their signals vanished. Victor Chun, May, Albright Chun, Luis Chun, Sarah Novak Chun. Names that would join the hull. Names that had always known they might. Anna Chun's fighter was the last to break formation. Her engine was burning unstable. Her canopy cracked. She had one missile left and no return vector. A Dominion torpedo slipped past her toward the Promise's exposed drive spine. Anna turned into it. Her final transmission was calm. "Tell Margaret we're late, but we came." The explosion lit the bridge white. The torpedo died. The path opened. Yara did not speak for 10 seconds. Then she said, "Carve her deep." Vethkar filled the forward screen. A dead moon. Gray. Frozen. Abandoned. No atmosphere. No city lights. No movement except the long shadows of ruined processing towers across frost and dust. The Dominion fleet pulled back in a high observation range. They did not attack. Perhaps they were waiting. Perhaps they were afraid. Perhaps even empires understood when a graveyard was not a battlefield. Yara took a shuttle alone. James argued. She refused. The Promise could barely hold orbit. Every trained officer was needed. Every engineer was needed. Every medic was needed. And some things could not be delegated because leadership was not command in that moment. It was witness. The shuttle landed hard near Facility 17. Yara stepped onto Vethkar with a failing suit, a burial scanner, and a small blue marker that had been manufactured on the Promise 112 years earlier by children who had never known whether it would be used. The cold struck instantly. Her suit heater flickered. She had perhaps an hour. The facility rose ahead, black windows, collapsed intake towers, silent conveyors that had once reduced living people into reports. Behind it stretched a field of numbered markers. Thousands. No names. The Dominion had not believed names were necessary. Yara walked past row after row, boots crunching on frozen soil. Her breath sounded loud inside her helmet. The burial scanner pulsed in her hand. Plot numbers passed in cold sequence. 1439, 1440, 1441, Yara slowed. 1445, 1446, 1447. The marker was half buried, a narrow Dominion stake with numbers worn thin by 2 centuries of wind. Yara fell to her knees. For a moment, the captain of the Promise, heir of a mission that had eaten generations, commander of a ship that had crossed the impossible, became only a woman kneeling in frost before a child who had been left alone. "We found you," she said. Her voice cracked. "We finally found you." The suit heater failed. Warnings flashed across her visor. She ignored them. She removed one glove and pressed her bare hand to the frozen ground. The cold burned instantly. Skin stuck to ice. She did not pull away. "I never met you," Yara whispered. "My mother never met you. Her mother never met you. But we know your face. We know your laugh. We know the song you liked. We know you asked for home." Her tears froze against her cheeks. "I am sorry we were late. We were so far away. We had only rockets and rage. We had no ships that could reach you. But we built them. We built them because of you. We crossed everything because of you." Above her, the Promise trembled in orbit, visible as a wounded star. "We are taking you home." Yara activated the blue marker. Words formed in human script, then Dominion, then every language stored in the Promise. Margaret Chun, beloved daughter, never forgotten. Then Yara began to dig. In orbit, every ship watched. Dominion officers who had conquered worlds watched a human captain dig into frozen soil with her bare hands. Corvaith watched from eternal Dominion, unable to give an order. Yethries watched from ascending truth and wept quietly where no one could see him. Sulin watched through a stolen archive feed, while security boots thundered closer through the tunnel outside her chamber. The Promise watched. Its crew watched their captain recover the remains of the child who had built their entire lives. 6 hours later, Yara returned to orbit carrying a small sealed container. The bridge rose when she entered. No one ordered them to. She placed the container in the center of the Hall of Names. The ship went silent. Then, from the oldest speakers in the vessel, a recording played. Margaret at 7 years old, laughing because Elias had spilled flour across their kitchen on Colony 7. The recording had survived war, migration, time, grief, and 4 generations of playback. Yara stood before the container. Margaret Chun, she said, voice raw. Daughter of Lena and Thomas Chun. Sister of Elias Chun. Taken from Colony 7. Found at Vethkar. Returning home. Every crew member answered. Returning home. Then the Dominion core fleet arrived. High Sovereign Malith had ruled for 300 years, and in all that time, he had never stood in his throne room feeling smaller than a ship on a screen. The Promise was dying. Anyone could see it. Its shield was gone. Its hull was cracked open in 17 sectors. Fighters gone. Weapons silent. Engines failing. It had broken through the 3rd Fleet, survived core interceptors, reached Vethkar, recovered Margaret Chun, and now it was trying to leave Dominion space with the stubborn, irrational insistence of a wounded animal carrying its young. Around it, 100 Dominion warships took firing positions. General Cathros stood beside the throne. High Sovereign, one order. We end this. Malith did not answer. High Sovereign, they violated our space. They killed our soldiers. They humiliated the 3rd Fleet. If we allow them to leave, every subject system will see weakness. Malith turned toward him. Tell me about the ship. Cathros blinked. The human ship? Tell me about it. It is a military vessel approximately 40 years old, though advanced beyond known human capability. Crew complement uncertain. It crossed our border illegally, resisted interception, and caused severe fleet damage. No, Malith's voice was quiet. Tell me about the ship. He expanded the image. The Promise filled the throne room display, black hull burned, names shining along its surface. 40 years ago, humanity launched this vessel before it knew whether it could survive the journey. The crew knew they would die aboard it. Their children knew they would inherit it. Their grandchildren knew they might reach the end and find nothing. And still they went. The room quieted. For one child, Malith said. One human taken by our scientists 2 centuries ago. Cathros stiffened. The strategic value of the mission is absurd. Yes. The resources expended are irrational. Yes. The deaths they accepted are mathematically indefensible. Yes, Malith said. And yet look at them. The Promise crawled toward the edge of Vethkar orbit. They did not come for territory. They did not come for wealth. They did not even come first for vengeance. They came because they remembered one of their own after every practical reason to remember had died. He opened the ancient human assessment file. Aggressive pack bonding. Irrational attachment to individuals. Emotional reasoning masquerading as strategy. We wrote this as weakness, Malith said. We were wrong. Cathros looked angry now. High Sovereign, love does not defeat empires. Malith stared at the damaged human ship. No, but it teaches children to build ships that do. That silenced the room. Malith turned fully to his generals. We took 12 humans. One child brought 1 generation ship. What happens when the other 11 families arrive? What happens when Earth learns we fired on this one? What happens when humanity decides the Dominion is not merely guilty, but dangerous to every family that exists? No one answered. They will not fight like the Vorthan. They will not negotiate like the machine minds. They will not stop when the cost becomes unreasonable. They measure obligation in centuries. We measure war in campaigns. That is why we will lose. Cathros stepped forward. Then destroy this ship now before it returns. Malith looked at him with something almost like pity. And turn a rescue mission into a holy war. The throne room doors opened. Security dragged Archivist Sulin inside. Her hands were bound. Her face was bruised. She stood straighter than Malith expected. Cathros pointed. This archivist betrayed the Dominion and transmitted Vethkar coordinates to the humans. Malith studied her. Why? Sulin's voice shook, but did not break. Because she asked for her mother for 27 years. The room went very still. Sullen looked at the display showing the promise. And because they came, Malif made his decision. Release her. Cathros turned. High Sovereign. Release her. The guards hesitated, then obeyed. Malif faced the fleet. Command display. All Dominion vessels, stand down. Allow the human ship to depart. No lock-ons. No pursuit. No tracking beyond neutral space. The throne room erupted. He raised one hand, and the noise died. Find the files for all 12 specimens, Malif ordered. Their burial sites, their labor records, their final locations, everything. Send the information to the human vessel immediately. Include apology language. Cathros recoiled as if struck. Apology? Yes. The Dominion does not apologize. The Dominion survives, Malif said. Today, survival requires learning the word. The data packet went out 30 seconds later. The promise received it at the edge of Vethkar's gravity well. Yara opened the file in the Hall of Names with James beside her. Around them stood the crew, bruised, exhausted, grieving, still alive. 11 names appeared. Samuel Ortiz, Amara Okonkwo, Peter Wallace, June Park, Nadia El Sayed, Mateo Rivera, Hannah Brooks, Elias North, Sophie Amani, Daniel Reyes, Margaret Chin already found. Locations, files, burial places, labor records, dates of death, and at the end, a message from the High Sovereign of the Dominion. The Dominion acknowledges that these persons were taken unlawfully, held without consent, and denied return. The Dominion will not interfere with recovery. Safe passage is granted. The Dominion expresses regret. James stared at the word. Regret. Yara's face hardened. Not enough. No, but it is a beginning. She touched Margaret's container. We came for 12. The promise turned. James stared at her. Captain, the ship cannot survive 11 more recovery operations. Not alone. He followed her gaze to the long-range sensor display. At first, he thought the readings were errors. Then he understood. The space beyond the neutral boundary was filling with human signatures. Not one ship. Not 11. Hundreds. The promise had never been humanity's only answer. It had been the first ship that could reach the Dominion. The one built by the Chens because Margaret's family refused to wait. But during its 40-year journey, Earth had changed. Human industry had expanded. Shipyards had multiplied around Jupiter, Saturn, Proxima, Barnard's Star, Tau Ceti. The old quarantine buoys had been dismantled and thrown into museums as examples of other people's bad judgment. And every year, as the promise sent status pulses back across impossible distance, more families had prepared. Now they had come. The homecoming armada crossed into Dominion sensor range in a formation so vast that even Eternal Dominion's command AI needed time to count it. At the front flew 12 great memorial ships, each bearing the name of one stolen human. Margaret's ship was the promise. Behind it came Samuel's lantern, Amara's road, Peter's watch, June's answer, Nadia's dawn, Mateo's bridge, Hannah's grace, Elias northbound, Sophie's garden, Daniel's return, and the smallest, fiercest escort carrier, never again. Around them moved hundreds of human vessels, rescue cruisers, medical ships, defense carriers, archive frigates, diplomatic craft, engineering haulers, fighter wings, and black hull dreadnoughts that carried no aggressive markings except one phrase painted in white along every bow. We came for our own. Margaret Wing, or what remained of it, transmitted the news across the promise. The crew did not cheer. They cried. Captain Yara Chin opened a channel to the incoming fleet. This is promise. We found Margaret. For 3 seconds there was no reply. Then every ship in the homecoming armada answered at once. Bring her home. The Dominion watched as humanity entered not in conquest formation, but in funeral formation. That made it worse. War fleets could be understood. Funeral fleets implied memory. Ceremony. Witness. A kind of violence slower than plasma and harder to stop. Human fighters formed honor corridors around the damaged promise. Medical ships docked without asking permission because the promise's crew had waited 40 years for relief and bureaucracy would not insult them now. Engineering haulers locked repair frames around the cracked hull. Children from the younger ships pressed hands against viewports, looking at the vessel that had become legend before they were born. Yara was ordered by 3 admirals, 2 doctors, and one elderly aunt she had never met to stand down from command. She refused the admirals. She obeyed the aunt. The recovery operations lasted 6 weeks. The Dominion did not interfere. Human teams landed on moons, stations, abandoned factories, prison asteroids, agricultural labor worlds, and one derelict orbital platform still drifting under automated Dominion quarantine. They recovered bones where bones remained, ash where ash remained, soil where ash had become indistinguishable from dust, and memory where nothing physical survived. At each site, a marker was placed. Name, age, taken from Earth, never forgotten. Dominion citizens watched in secret at first, then openly. Workers in old facilities left flowers or their nearest equivalent. Junior officers leaked records to human archive teams. Some did it from fear, some from shame, some because Sullen had become famous before the state could decide how to erase her. At the 11th recovery, on a mining station where Hannah Brooks had died at 19 after sabotaging a containment door to free 3 other captives, Dominion laborers gathered along the corridor as humans carried her remains out. No one ordered them to kneel. They did. Yara saw it through a medical recovery feed and felt no satisfaction. Only exhaustion. Only the terrible knowledge that grief could change people, but never return the dead. The last file belonged to Daniel Reyes. He had lived longest of the 12, 41 years. He had taught other captives human songs in secret. His file included disciplinary notes for organizing work stoppages, comforting new specimens, and refusing to answer to a number. He had died on a Dominion agricultural moon beneath an open sky he could not escape. When the recovery team found his burial place, the local governor attempted formal protest, then saw the human dreadnought Never Again descend into low orbit and changed his mind into silence. Daniel's marker was placed at sunset. The 12 were found. The homecoming armada prepared to leave. High Sovereign Malith requested one meeting. Not aboard a Dominion station. Aboard the Promise. His advisors called it madness. He went anyway. The shuttle crossed through the human formation under the eyes of ships that had crossed. Centuries for bones. Malith saw the hull of the Promise up close. Burned, cracked, patched by fresh repair scaffolds, names covering every surface like armor made from memory. Near the bow, a new name had been carved deeper than the others. Margaret Chun, beloved daughter, never forgotten. Captain Yara Chun received him in the Hall of Names. She was still pale from suit exposure and blood loss, but stood straight. Around her, 12 containers rested beneath human flags, family cloths, photographs, toys, fragments, soil samples, and memory lights. Malith did not sit. You should know, he said, that General Cathros has been removed from command. The Species Assessment Initiative files have been opened. The remaining captive programs are being shut down. Yara's expression did not change. Are we supposed to thank you for ending kidnapping? No good. Malith accepted the blow. I came to ask what humanity intends. Yara looked around the Hall of Names. You think we came here to decide whether to destroy you? Yes. We discussed it. I assumed so. Some of us wanted to. I assumed that too. She stepped closer. My ancestor Elias Chun wanted Margaret home. Every generation after him wanted the same. We were raised on a promise, not a war plan. Do not mistake the two. Malith lowered his head slightly. But if you take from us again, Yara said, her voice quiet enough that the room seemed to lean toward it. If any Dominion ship crosses into human space for another child, another worker, another specimen, another resource you decide has no name, we will come back. Not one ship. Not 12. All of us. Malith believed her. That belief changed Dominion policy more than morality ever had. What do you require? He asked. Names, Yara said. Not just ours. Everyone. Malith looked up. Every species you took. Every specimen. Every labor transfer. Every unnamed grave. You will open the archives. You will let families search. You will allow recovery teams. You will return remains. You will identify the living. You will end the programs. Publicly. That will destabilize the Dominion. Yes. It may cause rebellion. Yes. It may end my rule. Yara's eyes were hard. Then let something better begin. The Dominion did not become kind overnight. Empires rarely wake from cruelty as if from sleep. They fracture first. They deny. They bargain. They try to preserve their shape while claiming transformation. But the archives opened because Malith had learned fear from the only enemy he could not calculate, a family with patience. Names emerged. Millions. Not all dead. Some alive. Some descendants of captives still held under classified labor designations. Some integrated into Dominion worlds with no knowledge of origin. Some buried beneath numbers. Some scattered through systems that had forgotten they were stolen. The homecoming armada did not go home immediately. It became something else. The recovery fleet. Human ships stayed. Dominion dissidents joined. Archivist Sulan became the first director of the Open Grave Commission. Yethries resigned from Border Command and volunteered as liaison. Even Corvaith, disgraced and stripped of fleet authority, testified to the moment the promise kept asking where while under fire, and his words were entered into the new legal record. The Dominion shook. Subject worlds saw the archives and rose, not all with weapons, though many did. Some demanded independence. Some demanded reparations. Some demanded their dead. Human diplomats moved through the chaos with warships behind them and recovery teams ahead of them, insisting that vengeance could not be allowed to bury truth under fresh bodies. That was the hardest campaign. Not the battle. Not the fleet crossing. Not Vethkar. The hardest campaign was convincing grief not to become the thing it hated. There were failures. A Dominion prison moon was burned by rebels before records could be saved. A human escort captain fired on a surrendered facility after seeing children's cages inside. She surrendered herself to court afterward and spent the rest of her life working for victim archives. 3 Dominion governors tried to hide files and were removed by their own citizens. The old empire cracked in ugly lines. But the recovery fleet kept moving. Everywhere it went, it carried the same message. Names matter. The dead are not. Resources. No one becomes a number if someone is still looking. 20 years after the promise crossed the border, the Dominion no longer called itself the Dominion. The high sovereignty dissolved under treaty pressure, internal revolt, archival exposure, and the simple exhaustion of a people forced to look too long at what had been done in their name. In its place rose the Vethkar Accord, a fragile union of former Dominion worlds, liberated subject systems, victim lineages, and human observers. Its first law was carved into the chamber where Malith had once ordered silence and later ordered the archives opened. No person may be taken beyond the reach of their name. The promise returned to Sol at last. It did not return alone. The homecoming armada entered human space carrying the 12, but also thousands of recovered dead from other species whose families had asked to travel with the fleet until proper homes could receive them. The journey back took months because the promise could no longer move quickly. No one suggested abandoning it. Whole fleets adjusted to its wounded pace. Earth waited. So did Mars, Luna, the outer colonies, the Jovian cities, the Saturn habitats, the old colony 7 memorial rebuilt from fragments after the original abduction. Humans gathered in every dome, street, orbital station, valley, classroom, and shipyard. The broadcast reached across every world that had followed the mission. Yara Chun carried Margaret home. Not as a warrior, not as a conqueror, as family. At Colony 7 Memorial, beneath a real sky on a world Margaret had left at 7 years old, 12 containers were placed before 12 empty chairs. Elias Chen's preserved recording played first, the old one where he had been young, furious, and shaking. They took Margaret. We are going to get her back. Then Yara spoke. We did. No one cheered. Some moments are too heavy for applause. The 12 were buried with names, photographs, songs, stories, and soil from every place their families had searched. Around Margaret's grave, children placed small carved stars. One of them, a little girl with dark hair and a missing front tooth, placed a drawing of the promise. Yara knelt beside her. What is your name? She asked. Margaret, the child said shyly. My parents named me after her. Yara smiled through tears. Then she came home to a world that remembered. The promise was retired into orbit above Colony 7. Not scrapped. Never scrapped. It became a memorial station, a school, an archive, and a warning. Young pilots trained in its old hangars. Historians cataloged the names on its hull. Families walked its corridors and touched the carved marks of people who had crossed the dark for someone they never met. Dominion visitors came too, under escort at first, then as students, then as partners in recovery work. Archivist Sulan visited in the last year of her life. She stood before Margaret's name for an hour. Yara, older now, joined her. I sent one message, Sullen said. It was the message we needed. I filed her death first. You found her after. Sullen's eyes filled. Is that enough? Yara looked at Margaret's name. No, Sullen bowed her head. Yara touched her shoulder. But it mattered. That was the closest thing to absolution either of them could honestly bear. Years later, after Yara's hair had gone silver and the last original crew born during the Promise mission had passed into memory, a new human ship launched from the memorial station. It was not black like the Promise. It was white and blue, with gold nameplates and open hangar bays. It carried no weapons larger than defensive batteries, but it carried laboratories, archives, forensic teams, negotiators, grief counselors, translators, and recovery drones. Its name was Still Looking. On its first mission, it did not go to Dominion space. It went beyond it. Because the opened archives had revealed a final horror, the Dominion had not invented the specimen trait. It had inherited it from older powers, bought records from silent markets, exchanged captives with empires that still existed beyond mapped borders. The work was not over. That was not tragedy. That was purpose. Yara watched Still Looking depart from the observation deck of the Promise Memorial Station. Beside her stood James, old and leaning on a cane, and a group of children from Earth, Vethkar, and former Dominion worlds. Among them was a young Dominion-descended girl named Sullen Mao, studying to become an archivist of missing persons. The child looked up at Yara. Will they find everyone? Yara watched the ship's engines brighten. No, the child's face fell. Yara continued. But they will find someone. Then someone else. Then someone after that. And they will teach others to keep looking. Even if it takes 200 years. Yara's hand rested against the viewport, over the distant shape of the Promise hull. Especially then. Still Looking jumped. The stars folded. The ship vanished. Around the old memorial station, the carved names on the Promise caught sunlight from Sol and glowed in lines of gold across black metal. Thousands of names. Generations of them. People who had lived and died inside a Promise. People who had crossed the galaxy for a child told no one was coming. They had been late. They had failed to save her life. But they had not failed to answer. And that answer had broken a border, humbled an empire, opened graves across 1,000 worlds, and taught the galaxy a truth older than fear. If humans love you, distance is not enough. Time is not enough. Death is not enough. Somewhere, somehow, through war fleets, dead moons, locked archives, and empires that believe forgetting is policy, they will keep coming until they find your name. Still Looking vanished beyond the old Dominion border and returned 3 months later with no weapons fired, no hull breach, and one impossible word painted across its emergency broadcast. Alive. For 12 seconds, no one on the Promise Memorial Station moved. The old ship hung above Colony 7 with sunlight glowing along the carved names on its hull, and every screen in the Hall of Names showed the same message from Still Looking, repeated in human standard, Vethkar Accord script, Dominion archival code, and the recovered languages of a dozen stolen peoples. Alive. Captain Yara Chun, older now, silver threaded through her dark hair, stood beneath Margaret's name with one hand pressed to the railing. Around her, descendants of the Promise crew, former Dominion archivists, recovery officers, children from Earth, Vethkar, and the liberated systems all stared at the transmission as if the word itself might break if anyone breathed too hard. James Chun, leaning on his cane beside her, whispered, "Who?" The next burst came through damaged, delayed by interference, and wrapped in static from a region of space no modern chart trusted. Multiple human-descended lineages detected. Captive population confirmed. Non-Dominion origin. Pre-Dominion trade network active. Coordinates attached. Requesting recovery, fleet mobilization. This is Still Looking. We found the market. The market. Yara closed her eyes. The word had appeared in Dominion files again and again, always half-erased, always coded beneath layers of bureaucratic rot. Not one place. Not one species. A network older than the Dominion, older than the current borders, older than the treaties that pretended the civilized galaxy had outgrown the buying and selling of people. The Dominion had been one customer, one participant, one empire arrogant enough to preserve records of what others had learned to hide. And now Still Looking had found a living branch. The Hall of Names erupted into motion. not panic. The promise had raised generations inside emergencies. Its descendants did not panic easily. They moved with the brutal focus of people who had just heard history call their name again. Yara opened a system-wide channel. All recovery fleet commanders, assemble at Colony 7. Medical ships first. Archive teams second. Defense carriers third. Do not wait for full diplomatic clearance. Notify the Vethkar Accord, Earth Defense, the Open Grave Commission, and every family registry connected to the 12. We have living captives. James's face was pale. Yara, this could be a trap. Yes. They may be using human lineages as bait. Yes. They may have a fleet waiting. Yara turned toward the viewport, where the old promise and its thousands of names caught the sun. Then we will bring a fleet large enough to make bait regret its career. The homecoming armada gathered again, but this time it was not funeral formation. It was recovery formation. The dreadnought never again took the outer spearhead, not because humanity wanted war, but because the universe had already proven that rescue without teeth invited predators to test the softness of mercy. Behind it came still looking, scarred from deep-range reconnaissance, white and blue hull stained by radiation dust from unknown lanes. Around them assembled medical cruisers, forensic frigates, archive ships, trauma carriers, negotiation vessels, shield barges from former Dominion worlds, and 3 generations of memorial fleet fighters flying under the old call sign Margaret Wing. From Vethkar came Accord vessels crewed by former Dominion citizens who had grown up under Imperial lies and chosen to spend their lives undoing them. From Sulin's Open Grave Commission came archivists with legal warrants, memory banks, and burial experts. From Earth came the Carrier Remembrance Fire, launched from the Jupiter yards, carrying soldiers trained not only in boarding actions, but in victim extraction, evidence preservation, and how not to let rage destroy the very people they were trying to save. Yara did not command the entire armada. She had refused that title years ago. But when she stepped onto the bridge of Still Looking, every commander across the fleet opened their channel and waited. Because some authority comes from rank. Some comes from surviving the thing everyone else is afraid to name. Yara looked at the fleet display. Hundreds of ships. Humans, Vethkar Accord, liberated subject worlds, even observers from the new assembly of answering worlds. She saw Samuel's lantern, Amara's road, June's answer, Nadia's dawn, and Daniel's return. Ships built around grief, now carrying purpose. She opened fleet-wide communications. We are not going there to punish the past, she said. We are going there to recover the living, identify the dead, seize the records, and end the market. If they surrender, we take them alive. If they run, we disable. If they threaten captives, we move faster than fear. Remember why the promise crossed the dark. We did not come this far to become another empire with better songs. The fleet answered as one. Names matter. The coordinates led beyond the meridian scar, a region of folded gravitational debris left by an ancient war nobody claimed to remember. Navigation inside the scar was dangerous. Sensor ghosts repeated ships that were no longer there. Light bent in wrong directions. Some stars appeared twice, others not at all. Still Looking had found the route by following Dominion archival fragments and a trail of vanished transports. They entered in silence. For 6 hours, nothing challenged them. Then the stars rearranged. Yara saw it first as a curve in the forward display, a place where darkness moved as if something enormous had inhaled. The tactical officer began calling contacts. 10, 30, 90, 200. Platforms. Patrol craft. Cargo cages. Docking spines. Defense moons. Then the central structure emerged from optical distortion. The market was not a station. It was a stolen city. A ringed fortress built around a hollow asteroid, covered in docking arms and prison habitats, its outer hull plated with parts taken from thousands of ships. Engines from one civilization. Shield emitters from another. Habitation domes cut from colony vessels. Medical modules twisted into containment labs. At its center burned a red commercial beacon older than shame. Its name appeared on a recovered Dominion registry. The Quiet Exchange. Yara felt every person on her bridge understand the obscenity of that name at the same time. The market broadcast first. Unidentified fleet, you are entering protected commercial territory. This facility operates under heritage trade law predating current regional jurisdictions. Withdraw or submit purchase credentials. James, patched in from the Promise Memorial as elder advisor, made a low sound of disgust. Yara's voice was steady. This is Captain Yara-chun of the Recovery Fleet. Your trade law is rejected. You are holding sentient captives. Release all living persons, preserve all records, power down defensive systems, and prepare for inspection. The reply came with a soft chime, as if from a bank. Recovery claims must be processed through ownership arbitration. Estimated review time, 87 standard years. Yara stared at the red-lit fortress. Never again, she said. The dreadnought's commander answered instantly. Standing by. Show them the short form. Never again fired one shot. Not at the station. Not at a habitat. Not at a ship. At the red commercial beacon. The beam crossed space in a clean white line and vaporized the ancient market signal into a spray of molten fragments. Yara opened the channel again. Review complete. The Quiet Exchange launched its fleet. Slaver craft spilled from docking arms in hundreds. Fast interceptors, cage haulers, dead enforcement cruisers, automated defense drones, and 3 heavy battle platforms built around old dreadnought cores. The market had survived for centuries because it never fought fair. It hid behind captives, false ownership records, legal confusion, and the reluctance of civilized powers to admit such a place could still exist. The Recovery Fleet did not hesitate. Margaret Wing moved first. Their fighters scattered into blue engine arcs, not engaging the nearest enemies, but racing toward the prison habitats to establish shield corridors. Vethkar Accord cruisers followed, projecting wide defensive shells around the habitats before the market could use them as leverage. Human destroyers cut between cage haulers and jump lanes, disabling engines with surgical fire. Archive frigates launched record drones that latched onto data towers and began copying everything even while the battle unfolded. The market's first battle platform fired on a prison dome. Never again intercepted the beam with its own shield. The dreadnought shook but held. Its commander broadcast openly, voice calm and cold. You do not get to threaten prisoners and call it strategy. Remembrance Fire launched boarding teams. Yara watched their trajectories, hundreds of small craft streaming toward the Quiet Exchange under cover of jamming and shield fire. Every boarding craft carried mixed teams, soldiers, medics, translators, archivists. The first lesson of the Recovery Fleet had been written at Vethkar. Finding someone was not enough if you destroyed the proof of who they were. The second lesson had come later. Rescuing the living required people ready to speak gently while the walls burned. Inside the market, chaos spread. Still looking breached, docking spine 12. Yara went with the first command team, despite 3 separate medical officers threatening to sedate her. She stepped into a corridor painted gold and black, too ornate for a prison, too sterile for a home. The air smelled of disinfectant and old fear. They found the first holding chamber behind a coded door. Children, not only human descended, dozens of species, some with translator tags embedded in collars. Some born there, their eyes wide at the sight of open-armored rescuers. A little boy with unmistakably human features but silver Dominion-style skin markings stared at Yara's face as if trying to decide whether she was real. Yara removed her helmet. My name is Yara-chun, she said softly. We are here to take you out. A child asked, did someone buy us? Yara's throat closed for one dangerous second. No, she said. Someone found you. Behind her, a medic began crying and kept working anyway. The market commanders tried to delete the records. They failed because Sulan had trained the archive teams well. Every system they touched was copied before it could burn. Every hidden ledger spawned 3 backups across the fleet. Every name was preserved. Every false transfer. Every birth. Every death. Every buyer. Every seller. Every government that had looked away. The Quiet Exchange's master, a polished creature named Varric Thane, attempted escape aboard a luxury cutter disguised as a medical ship. A Margaret Wing pilot disabled it without damaging the passenger compartment. Thane was dragged onto still looking in clothes worth more than some habitats. He looked offended, not afraid. You have no authority here, he said. Yara stood before him in the recovery bay, still wearing armor scratched by market debris. You are standing on a ship named Still Looking, she said. Authority is the wrong question. You cannot prosecute a heritage institution. No, Yara said. But I can preserve every record you kept, rescue every person you priced, broadcast every buyer you served, and deliver you alive to every court that grows out of the fire. Thane smiled thinly. Courts are slow. Yara stepped closer. So are promises. The battle lasted 14 hours. The rescue lasted 9 months. That was the part no songs knew how to carry. Battles were simple enough to dramatize. Engines, shields, boarding doors, enemy surrender. Rescue was harder. Rescue was medical scans, panic attacks, missing languages, contaminated memories, children afraid of open doors because open doors had always meant transfer. Rescue was forensic teams in sealed chambers. It was adults discovering their grandparents had been stolen and they themselves were proof of a crime. It was human-descended captives who did not know Earth, did not know the Chun name, did not know why strangers wept when genetic markers linked them to Colony 7. Yara stayed through all of it. The Quiet Exchange became a recovery city. Its prison domes were cut open and rebuilt into treatment wards, gardens, interview rooms, and family registry centers. The red commercial halls were stripped bare. The auction chambers became evidence archives. The central transaction floor became a memorial space where no one was allowed to speak above a whisper. And every day, the names grew. Not just the 12. Not just humans. Millions of names hidden inside ledgers older than borders. The most difficult discovery came in the 3rd month. A living lineage descended from Margaret Chen's fellow captives had survived in the market network through forced transfers, hidden pairings, illegal adoptions, and labor contracts. They were not direct descendants of Margaret. She had died too young. But they were descendants of the other 11 stolen humans, mixed across generations with other captive populations. Some looked human. Some did not. Some had human names preserved as forbidden lullabies without knowing what the words meant. One elderly woman, nearly 90, sang a broken version of an old Earth song when shown a recording from the Promise Archive. She did not understand the lyrics. Her grandmother's grandmother had sung it to her. Yara listened until the woman finished. Then she knelt in front of her. "You are family." The woman touched Yara's cheek with trembling fingers. "I do not know how to be that." Yara smiled through tears. "We can learn slowly." News of the Quiet Exchange did what even the Promise had not fully done. It broke denial across half the galaxy. Not all at once. There were governments that claimed the records were fabricated. Corporations that insisted heritage trade was legal under pre-modern charter. Former Dominion officials who tried to argue they had been buyers, not architects. Border powers that wanted the market shut down quietly before their own names appeared. But the recovery fleet had learned from old failures. The evidence did not go to one council. It went everywhere. Every classroom, every news relay, every memorial station, every former subject world, every family registry, every court willing to listen, and every street willing to shout. Ledhari glass singers turned market ledgers into color laments. Denari archivists cross-indexed the dead. Thalen listening ships carried testimony into quiet systems. Human children learned the names of places that adults had once considered too terrible to teach. And across the old trade routes, hidden markets began going dark. Some fled. Some surrendered. Some were found by fleets that had learned the recovery doctrine. Supply ships for survivors. Medical ships for the wounded. Archive ships for truth. Warships for anyone who tried to stop the first 3. The final hidden market, Black Meridian, tried to fight. It had a fleet larger than the Quiet Exchange, older weapons, and a command moon shielded by stolen Thalen living armor. It also had arrogance, which remained the most renewable strategic failure in the galaxy. The recovery fleet arrived with allies no one had imagined 20 years earlier. Human dreadnoughts held the line. Vethkar Accord ships opened data vaults. Thalen living vessels unfolded shield harmonics that freed their stolen armor from Black Meridian's control. Denari rescue frigates took civilians out through fire. Ledhari signal artists overloaded enemy command channels with testimony from survivors until 3 mercenary wings defected mid-battle. And at the center flew the Promise. Old, patched, retired in theory, reawakened by vote of its descendants, and moved from memorial orbit with half of Earth screaming objections. It did not lead the attack. Its weapons remained cold. It flew through the battle broadcasting names. Margaret, Samuel, Amara, Peter, June, Nadia, Mateo, Hannah, Elias, Sophie, Daniel, then the names from the Quiet Exchange, then the names from Vethkar. then the names from 1,000 ledgers. The broadcast became so vast that Black Meridian's command AI slowed under the weight of identity. It had been built to track assets, not people. The distinction killed it. When the command moon surrendered, Yara was on the bridge of still looking, watching the promise glide beyond the wreckage with sunlight along every carved name. James had died the year before. Sullen was gone. Malith was gone. Most of the first generation of witnesses had passed into memory. But the work remained alive because it had finally become too large for grief alone to carry. It had become law, habit, education, reflex. 1,000 worlds now taught children one sentence. A person is not lost while someone is still looking. The happy ending did not arrive like a single sunrise. It arrived as a series of doors opening. The first was on Earth, where the 12 stolen humans were given not only graves, but homes in history. Their descendants, direct and discovered, were welcomed without purity tests, without demands that they prove enough humanists to belong. Some settled on Earth. Some remained on worlds where they had been born. Some traveled. Some changed their names. Some kept names given by captors and turned them into names of survival. Humanity argued, imperfectly and loudly, and eventually chose the only answer that honored the promise. Family is not weakened by distance. The second door opened on Vethkar, where the dead moon became a living archive. Its processing towers were dismantled. Its numbered grave fields were restored with names wherever names could be found. Where names could not be found, markers read unknown, not unloved. Former Dominion citizens came there on pilgrimages, not to be forgiven cheaply, but to learn the cost of obedience without conscience. The third door opened in the old Dominion capital, where the throne room became the chamber of returned names. No sovereign sat there again. The place, where Malith once ruled, became a public record hall. School children stood beneath the same ceiling where generals had demanded the promise be destroyed and read aloud the first law of the Vethkar Accord. No person may be taken beyond the reach of their name. The fourth door opened aboard the Promise Memorial Station. Yara, very old now, stood in the Hall of Names while a new generation prepared the launch of a fleet larger than any recovery mission before it. Not warships alone, not memorial ships alone. The fleet carried historians, builders, teachers, trauma healers, translators, forensic scientists, gardeners, musicians, and children old enough to understand why they were invited. At the center was a new vessel, grown and built by human, Phelan, Denari, Vethkar, and Ledhari hands. Its hull was white, blue, and gold. No weapons on the bow. No threat phrase. Only a name. All the way home. A little girl stood beside Yara, dark-haired, missing one front tooth, a descendant of one of the recovered lineages from the Quiet Exchange. Her name was Margaret, like so many children now, but she had insisted everyone call her Meg because history was heavy and she preferred shorter words. "Are we still looking?" Meg asked. Yara looked at the ancient carved walls of the promise. "Yes." "For who?" Yara smiled. "Everyone." Meg frowned in concentration. "That is a lot." "It is." "Will we finish?" Yara took her hand. "No." Meg looked up. Yara squeezed gently. "But every person found is a whole universe returned. We do not have to finish to make it worth doing." The launch ceremony began. Across the station, descendants of the Promise crew stood beside descendants of Dominion archivists, recovered captives, former subject peoples, Phelan listeners, Denari rescuers, and children from worlds that had once been footnotes in someone else's file. No one stood above anyone else. That had been Yara's only demand. The old recording of Elias Chun played one final time. "They took Margaret. We are going to get her back." Then another recording followed. Yara on Vethkar, voice broken by cold and grief. "We found you. We finally found you." Then the voice of the elderly woman from the Quiet Exchange, singing the Broken Earth song her grandmother had preserved without meaning. Then millions of names began scrolling across the hull displays. Known, unknown, recovered, living, still missing. All the way home powered its engines. Yara watched the ship move beyond the memorial station. The Promise remained in orbit, old and scarred and bright with names. The new fleet formed around all the way home in the pattern that had come to define the age. Archives leading, rescue ships close, warships guarding, builders following, listeners everywhere. A final transmission opened across the galaxy. Yara had recorded it earlier because her voice was no longer strong enough to trust live. My name is Captain Yara-chun of the Promise. I was born on a ship built for a girl I never met. I spent my life learning that love can be late and still matter. I learned that recovery is not revenge, but it must be strong enough to survive those who profit from forgetting. I learned that an apology is not repair, that a grave is not home until a name reaches it, and that the dead are not quiet when the living carry them honestly. Across thousands of systems, people listened. If you are hidden, we are still looking. If you were taken, we are still looking. If your name was changed, numbered, sold, erased, buried, or locked away, we are still looking. And if you are one of those who did the taking, hear this clearly. The age of quiet graves is over. The transmission paused. Then her voice softened. Margaret came home. So will others. All the way home jumped. The fleet followed. Not into war. Not into conquest. Into the unfinished work of mercy. Yara lived long enough to receive the first report. A small colony beyond Black Meridian, descended from 3 stolen species, had been found alive under false contract law. No battle. No deaths. The local governor surrendered when all the way home arrived with court warrants, medical ships, and never again successor, holding position at high orbit. The first recovered child asked whether Earth was real. Meg, serving as junior cultural liaison, answered, yes. But home can be more than one place. Yara heard that report from her room. Aboard the Promise Memorial Station. She was too frail to stand often now, but her bed faced the viewport. Outside, Margaret's name glowed on the hull. She closed her eyes and imagined the first Promise crew, the launch generation, the children born in transit, Anna-chan turning her fighter into a torpedo, Sulin sending coordinates from the dark, Malith choosing fear of human love over pride, all the dead and living bound together by one impossible refusal. No one is gone just because an empire says so. On her final morning, Yara asked to be taken to the Hall of Names. They brought her in a hover chair and placed her beneath Margaret's carving. Meg stood beside her, now older, no longer a child, wearing the blue-white uniform of the recovery fleet. Around them gathered family in every direction: blood family, chosen family, recovered family, witness family. The categories mattered less than the circle. Yara lifted one hand and touched the wall. "Carve me small," she whispered. Meg laughed through tears. "No, Captain's order. You are retired." Rude. Meg knelt beside her. Yara's eyes remained on Margaret's name. "Did we bring her home?" she asked. Meg took her hand. "Yes. All of them." "Not yet." Yara smiled. "Good. Then someone still has a reason to fly." She died beneath the names, peacefully, with the engines of a departing recovery convoy vibrating faintly through the old hull of the Promise. They carved her name not small, despite her instruction. Yara-chun, born aboard the Promise. Found Margaret. Kept looking. Years later, children visiting the memorial would stand beneath that name and ask why the ship had crossed so far for one girl who was already gone. Their teachers would answer carefully. Because gone is not the same as forgotten. Because late is not the same as never. Because a name can outlive an empire. And because humans, once they love you, have a way of turning distance, time, war, death, and silence into obstacles that may take generations to cross, but never into reasons to stop. Above Colony 7, the Promise remained in orbit forever, not as a weapon, not as a monument to vengeance, but as proof. A family had crossed the galaxy for a child. An empire had opened its graves. A market had fallen. Millions of names had returned. And out beyond the old borders, wherever frightened voices whispered from hidden rooms or forgotten moons, the recovery fleets were still moving through the dark, white and blue engines burning, archive lights bright, warships guarding the fragile, and every hull carrying the same message in every language humanity had learned from loss. Hold on. Keep your name. We are still looking. Thank you sincerely for reading this story to its final hopeful ending and for sharing this journey of memory, grief, courage, recovery, and love across the stars. Please subscribe to support the channel and click https://www.youtube.com/@HFY_storytelling. https://www